Beamy Cal, 31 years old, tile guy, not the kind of job that sounds impressive at parties, but it pays decent, and I'm good at it. Up at 5:30 every morning, drive to the site, lay tile all day, come home. That's basically my whole life, and I was fine with that. Had an apartment, a truck that actually ran, and enough left over at the end of the month to not stress about it. Nothing glamorous, but nothing to complain about either. Grew up watching my dad work the same way. Didn't talk much, didn't need to, just showed up and did the job. I always figured that was just how it went. You handle your stuff, you don't dump it on people, you keep moving. Wasn't from some rough place or anything dramatic. Just a regular house where nobody really sat around talking about feelings. Not because anything was wrong, just because there wasn't much of a culture around it. Dad fixed things. Mom cooked. We ate together. That was the rhythm. I turned out pretty similar. Quiet, handy, not great at small talk, but not rude about it either. Had a few relationships before Cassie, nothing that lasted more than a year. One ended because she moved for work. Another one just kind of faded out the way some things do. No big blow-ups, no betrayals, just two people who didn't end up fitting. By the time I hit my late 20s, I wasn't thinking too hard about any of it. Was just living, working, saving a bit, seeing friends on weekends. Met Cassie through some mutual friends at a cookout. Summer, nothing special about it, just a normal afternoon. She was a social worker, talked a lot, laughed loud, seemed like she actually cared about people, which I respected. Asked me questions about tiling, which nobody ever does. Most people just nod and change the subject when you say what you do. She wanted to know how you do corners, what kind of tile is hardest to work with, whether I actually like the job. I told her the truth, which is that, yeah, I actually like it. There's something satisfying about a floor that lines up perfectly. You put in the work, and you can see exactly what you made at the end of the day. She seemed to find that genuinely interesting. We talked for a while, and then exchanged numbers. Started dating pretty shortly after that. First few months were good. She'd come over a few times a week. We'd cook something or pick up food, watch whatever was on. She talked more than me, but I didn't mind that. I'd answer questions, ask her things back, the usual back and forth. Thought things were going pretty well, honestly. She had strong opinions about a lot of stuff, politics, people, the way the world worked. I didn't always agree, but I found it interesting to hear. She was passionate about things, and that's not a bad quality. We went on actual dates, too, not just hanging around the apartment. She'd find things, a night market, some local thing happening, a restaurant she wanted to try. I'd go along, and we'd have a good time. She was fun when she was relaxed. I remember one night we drove out to look at something, a fair or a market or something like that. I don't remember exactly. On the way back, she fell asleep in the passenger seat. I just drove and didn't turn on the radio. Thought, yeah, this is a good thing. That's what I kept coming back to in the later months when things got heavier. I'd remember the earlier version of things and wonder where that version went. But that's getting ahead of it. Somewhere around the third or fourth month, she started sending me articles. Not in an aggressive way, just casually, like, hey, this made me think of you, or hey, found this interesting. First one was about emotional availability in relationships. I read it on my lunch break sitting in the truck. It was fine, had some reasonable points about not shutting down during conflict. I didn't think too much of it. Figured she just liked reading that kind of thing and was sharing it. Sent her back a thumbs up. Week or so later, another one came through. This one was specifically about men and communication, about how men are socialized to suppress emotion and how that damages their relationships without them realizing it. I read it too. Some of it made sense. Some of it felt like it was written for a very specific type of guy that wasn't really me. But I didn't say that. Just read it and moved on. Then another one, and another one after that. all on the same general theme. Men who don't open up, men with emotional walls, men who are so used to bottling things that they don't even see it in themselves. I started noticing that all of them were pointed in one direction, not like, hey, here's something I've been reflecting on about my own patterns. Just, here's something about men. Read this. Still didn't make a big deal of it. She brought it up in person eventually, not in a fighting way, more like a genuine concern she wanted to air. Said she felt like I wasn't really opening up to her. Said she needed a partner who could talk about what was going on inside, not just surface stuff. I asked her what she meant specifically, because I genuinely wasn't sure what I was missing. She said things like, when I ask how your day was, you just say tired or fine. You never actually tell me how it made you feel. I told her my day made me feel tired because I was on my knees laying tile in a bathroom for 8 hours. She didn't really find that funny. Said that's deflection. I sat with that for a second. I wasn't trying to deflect. I just answered the question. But okay, I figured I'd try harder. Started making more of an effort when I got home. Even when I was completely wiped out, I'd try to actually talk through the day a bit more. Not just fine, but actually say something about what happened, what I was thinking, how I was feeling about it. She seemed happier with that for a while. Things smoothed out and felt more normal again. I thought we'd found the level. Then she brought up couples therapy, said it would give us tools to communicate better, and that a lot of couples found it really useful. I wasn't against the idea. Figured if it helped us get on the same page, then a few sessions was a reasonable investment. We started going. Therapist was a calm, measured kind of guy, asked open-ended questions, let you finish your thoughts, didn't push too hard in any direction. First session was mostly just getting a picture of the situation. Second one, he went a bit deeper. Asked me what I needed from the relationship to feel comfortable and good in it. I thought about it honestly and said a few things. Said I needed to be able to come home and have a bit of quiet before jumping into conversation. Not because I didn't want to be around Cassie, but because after a full physical day, my brain was basically fried. Explained that when you're doing manual labor for 8 or 9 hours, your body is running on fumes by the time you get back. Said maybe half an hour to decompress, get changed, have a glass of water. And then I was genuinely happy to talk. Said it wasn't about her, just about how I functioned. Therapist nodded and said that was a completely reasonable and understandable need. Cassie nodded too. I thought we were actually making some real progress. Left that session feeling okay about things. Couple weeks later, we got into something at home. I don't even remember what started it. Some mix-up about plans. Someone thought the other one had said something they didn't. The kind of argument that feels significant in the moment and embarrassingly small a few days later. I was trying to explain my side of whatever it was. And then she said it. She brought up exactly what I had shared in the therapy session. Said something along the lines of, you literally told the therapist that you shut down and need to avoid things after work, so don't act confused when I say you're being emotionally unavailable. I stopped mid-sentence. What I had said in that session was that I needed half an hour to decompress after a physical workday. That is not the same thing as shutting down or avoiding intimacy. Those are two completely different things. But somehow, between the session and this argument, it had been converted and filed under Cal, admits he avoids closeness. I didn't point that out in the moment. Didn't feel like it would go anywhere productive. Just let the argument finish and moved on. But I remembered it, kept it in the back of my head. The therapy kept going. We kept showing up every week. I kept being honest when the therapist asked me things, because what else are you going to do in therapy? Perform. That defeats the whole point. So I just answered honestly every time. And slowly over the following weeks, I started noticing the pattern happen again. Things I said in that room were showing up later as evidence. I mentioned once that I sometimes felt like I wasn't fully meeting her expectations. Said it in the context of feeling like there was always a new standard I was slightly behind on. Said it as a way of trying to name something I was experiencing. 2 weeks later, during an argument, she said, "Even you admitted yourself that you're not meeting my needs." I hadn't admitted it as some kind of confession or agreement. I was describing a feeling I had, an internal experience. But it had been received as a concession and stored accordingly. Another time, I talked about growing up in a house where nobody really discussed feelings out loud. Wasn't blaming anyone, wasn't saying it was bad, just giving some context for why I might approach certain things differently. After that, she started using the word conditioning a lot, like, "Your toxic conditioning is what's keeping you from being fully open," or "The way men are conditioned means they genuinely don't realize the damage they're doing," always said in reference to me specifically, always as an explanation for whatever the current issue was. I kept going to the sessions, thought about skipping a few times, but figured stopping would just become the new thing to argue about. And honestly, I still believed in the idea of it, even if the experience of it was feeling off. Somewhere in this stretch, she also ramped up what she was sending me. Not just articles now, podcast episodes, video essays, clips from longer talks, all on the same general subject. Men who don't communicate, men with emotional walls, men who have so thoroughly absorbed toxic ideas about masculinity that they can't even see it operating in themselves. I watched some of it, listened to a couple of the podcasts on the drive to work in the morning. Some of the individual points were fair enough. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I started noticing something about the collection as a whole. Every single thing she ever sent me was about a man who needed to be corrected, improved, made aware of his own damage. There was never anything that came from the other direction. Never anything that was like, "Hey, I've been thinking about my own patterns here." Never anything that presented the dynamic as something that two people were both contributing to. It was always incoming, always aimed at me. I didn't say anything about it, just started watching less of it and saying, "Yeah, interesting," when she asked if I'd seen the latest one. There was one video in particular she sent that I watched all the way through. Some guy talking about how men have been conditioned since boyhood to treat emotional expression as weakness, and how that conditioning operates invisibly, which is why men can't just decide to change it. They need to be guided through it. I watched it, and honestly, some parts were fair. But there was a part where he said, if a man resists this work, that resistance itself is a symptom of the problem. And I sat with that for a while. Because what he was describing was a closed loop. If you agree, you're making progress. If you disagree, you're proving the diagnosis. There's no possible response that counts as being fine. I didn't share that thought with Cassie. Figured it would come back as more evidence of my defensiveness. Just said, "Yeah, interesting," and left it there. Around this same period, I started paying closer attention to how she talked about me when other people were in the room. Her friends were always fine with me, genuinely. I liked most of them well enough. But Cassie had this thing she'd do that I started noticing more clearly. Her friend would visit, and they'd be having a conversation, and at some point Cassie would sort of steer it toward us and say something like, "Oh yeah, we've been in therapy. It's been really valuable, especially for Cal." Or she'd say something like, "Cal's been working on being more emotionally present. It's a slow process, but he's putting in the effort." The tone of it was like a teacher giving a parent an update on a struggling student. I'd be right there in the room. I'd smile, maybe nod, not say anything. Her friends would do the supportive thing and move on to something else. But it lodged in me. I was the project. That was my assigned role in the story she was telling about us. I kept working. Tile season picked up, and I had a bigger commercial job that stretched across several weeks. Long days, early starts, coming home tired in a real physical way. The commercial stuff is different from residential. Bigger spaces, harder floors, tighter tolerances, because someone's going to be inspecting it professionally. You're on your feet or your knees for 9-10 hours, and by the time you're done, your lower back has its own opinions. Cassie was understanding about the hours, honestly. That wasn't an issue between us. She'd have food ready sometimes, or we'd order something. Those evenings were okay, but the communications subject never really went away. It was always in the background like a hum. If I was quiet for a couple evenings, because I was just spent, that was evidence of the wall. If I didn't feel like a heavy conversation on a Friday after a full week, that was me avoiding depth. Started to feel like there was no version of being tired that was acceptable. Like the correct response to being physically exhausted was to still perform emotional availability on demand. And if I couldn't deliver that, then I was confirming what she suspected about me. I started noticing I wasn't sleeping as well as I used to. Not insomnia or anything dramatic, just waking up earlier than I wanted to and not being able to get back down. Lying there thinking about nothing specific, just the general weight of things. Went to work tired more days than not for a stretch there. My coworker noticed but didn't say anything. Just made sure there was always coffee. The therapy sessions were starting to feel less like a helpful process and more like a structured setting for presenting her case. She'd come in sometimes with things she'd written down during the week. Specific incidents, specific things I did or didn't do, specific ways I had fallen short. The therapist would ask me to respond. I'd respond as honestly as I could. She'd reframe what I said in a way that fit the narrative she had brought in. Therapist would try to find some middle ground. I'd leave feeling like I had just sat through a proceeding where the outcome was already settled before we walked in. But I kept showing up. Because that's what she said a man who actually cares does. He does the work. He doesn't run from the hard conversations. So I kept doing the work and not running. One thing I started noticing more and more outside the sessions was how she talked about the men in her job. She was a social worker, so she dealt with heavy situations regularly. I understood the job was draining, and she needed to decompress about it sometimes. So I listened. But when she talked about patterns she was seeing in her cases, always in general terms without identifying details, it was always the same framing. Men who couldn't deal with their emotions, men whose inability to communicate was causing damage to everyone around them, men whose toxicity they were completely blind to, and I'd sit there and listen. And after a while I started feeling like that framing was following me home from her work. Like the category she held for the men she dealt with professionally was bleeding into the category she held for me personally. I wasn't those guys. I wasn't refusing to deal with anything. I was going to therapy every single week, answering honestly, saying things out loud I'd never said before. But somehow that still wasn't enough to not be in the category, because the issue, as far as I could piece together, wasn't actually that I didn't communicate. It was that I didn't communicate in a way that confirmed what she already believed about me. If I talked and what I said matched her theory, that was progress, that was growth, that was the work paying off. If I talked and what I said gently pushed back on her theory, that was defensiveness, that was the wall, that was exactly what she was talking about. The system was airtight. I started thinking about that more than I probably should have during the workday. Not obsessively, just turning it over while my hands were busy. You think about a lot of things when you're doing repetitive physical work. The hands run on autopilot, and your head is free to go wherever it wants. I'd be measuring a cut or mixing grout and just letting the thing sit in my head. Not getting angry exactly, just trying to understand the shape of it. Coworker noticed I was quieter than usual on a couple of jobs. Asked me once if everything was all right. I said yeah, just got some stuff I'm working through. He said okay and handed me a coffee, and that was the end of it. Good guy. Always knew exactly how much to push, which was basically never. We got to a point where the sessions had been going on for a while. Several months. I'm not going to pretend I know the exact number. And I started actually taking stock of what had changed. I was more verbally expressive than when we started. Genuinely. I was better at naming things, saying what I was feeling, rather than just going quiet and expecting her to figure it out. I thought that was the whole goal we had both been working toward. But the goalposts had moved. Now the issue was that I communicated, but not with enough depth. Or I talked about feelings, but I did it too rationally, too measured. It felt analytical rather than vulnerable. Or I was sharing things, but not the right things. Or I was present, but not fully present. There was always another layer of deficiency to get to. And I kept trying to get to it, kept trying to find the version of myself that would finally satisfy the standard. The dinner happened somewhere in the middle of all this. Cassie had 2 of her friends over. I'd been on a job that ran long that day, came home later than I expected. Still had some grout working its way out from under my nails even after washing up. That stuff gets into everything no matter what you do. Sat down at the table, said hi to everyone. They were already into some conversation. I just plugged in, ate, listened. Cassie was telling some story, and then kind of naturally pivoted and said, "Oh, and Cal has really been putting in work on the whole communication thing, therapy and everything, right, babe? It's been slow going, but he's making progress." Everyone smiled, supportive, warm smiles. I picked up my fork and looked at my plate. Her friends moved on to something else pretty quickly. I sat with it, though. Didn't say anything that night because Cassie was in a good mood, and honestly, I was too tired to get into it. But the next morning, driving to work, I was still thinking about it. She hadn't said anything cruel. She hadn't lied about anything factually. We were in therapy. I was working on things. That was all true. But the way she said it, the framing of it, she was giving her friends a status update on me like I was a renovation she was managing. I had been sitting right there. And the way she said it, babe, like I was supposed to confirm it for the audience. I confirmed nothing. Just kept eating. After that dinner, something shifted in how I was looking at things. Not dramatically, just quietly. I started actually paying attention to the pattern as a whole instead of just individual incidents. Started counting. Not literally, just in my head. How many times per week she said something like "real men do this," or "a man who actually cares would do that." It was a lot. It was basically daily. And the thing about that phrase, "real men," is that it doesn't leave you anywhere to stand. If you do the thing she's describing, you're just doing what you should. If you don't do it, you're not a real man. It's engineered so that compliance is invisible, and failure is the only thing that registers. I thought about my dad while I was working one morning. He was not a talker. Fixed everything in the house himself. Worked his whole career without complaining. Was there every morning when we woke up and every night at dinner. Nobody ever called him emotionally unavailable. He was just a guy who showed up. I'm not saying the old way was better, or that nothing should ever change. Just saying that the guy who keeps his word and shows up and does his work without making it anyone else's problem has value too. And it felt like that kind of person was just the baseline now, not something that counted. You did all of that, and it got filed under toxic conditioning. Started also paying attention to how many times she asked me something that was genuinely curious about me as a person, rather than as a subject of improvement. That number was much lower than I expected when I actually started noticing it. Most conversations circled back to the same subject eventually, which was me and what I wasn't doing right. Kept working, kept going to the sessions, kept coming home. She kept sending content. I watched less of it, but didn't say so. There was one session that sticks out to me more than the others. Therapist asked Cassie directly what she thought a good outcome would look like. She talked for a few minutes about wanting emotional depth, wanting to feel like Cal was actually there, wanting a partner who initiated meaningful conversations. Therapist then asked me the same question. I said I wanted to feel like the things I shared stayed between us instead of becoming ammunition. Said I wanted to be able to have a bad week at work without that becoming a diagnostic finding. Said I wanted to come home and have it feel like home. Cassie said something like, "That's the most I've heard you say in months. See? You can do it when you want to." I didn't respond to that. Therapist moved on, but I sat with what she said for a long time after. The implication being that every time I didn't do it, it was because I chose not to. Like the silence was always strategic. Like I was withholding on purpose, rather than just being a tired person at the end of a long day. That assumption bothered me more than most of the other stuff, because it meant that nothing I did would ever be about what it actually was. Everything got filtered through the theory first. Quiet was avoidance. Tired was shutting down. Needing space was emotional unavailability. And talking, as I was figuring out, was only useful if it confirmed the right things. Went to work the next day and thought about that while I was doing a floor in a laundromat downtown. Big, open space, straight runs, easy job. Just set the tile and thought. Had a conversation with my coworker that week that I keep coming back to. We were eating lunch outside a site, and I said something about how I'd been going to therapy. He didn't make a face or anything, just nodded. Said, "That's good, man. Is it helping?" I said honestly I wasn't sure. He said, "What do you mean?" I tried to explain the pattern I'd been noticing, the way things I said were getting turned around on me. He listened and didn't say much. Then he said something like, "Sounds like you can't win." I said, "Yeah, that's kind of what it feels like." He thought about it for a second and then just said, "Well, you know what, you know." Didn't say anything else. Went back to eating. I think about that a lot, actually. You know what, you know? Simple thing, but it landed somewhere real. Because the whole 2 years there was this constant pressure to doubt what I knew. Not in an overt way. Not like she was saying you're wrong and I'm right. More like your perception of yourself is clouded by your conditioning, so you can't fully trust your own read on things. And there's something disorienting about that after a while. You start second-guessing whether your tiredness is actually avoidance, whether your preference for quiet is actually a wall, whether the thing that feels normal to you is just damage you haven't processed yet. The therapy was supposed to help with that, but it was making it worse. Because every session added more data points to the case that my self-perception was unreliable. My coworker saying, "You know what, you know," was the first time in a long time someone had just taken my read on my own experience at face value. Didn't fix anything, but it helped. Somewhere in there, I stopped going to the gym I'd been going to for years, because the schedule stopped working with everything else. Small thing, but I noticed it. Used to go 3-4 times a week, then twice, then once when I had the energy for it, then not at all. Not because of anything Cassie said. She never said anything about that. Just because the overall load of everything had gotten heavier and something had to give. That's the kind of thing you don't notice while it's happening. You just notice one day that you haven't been in a while. Started doing more work on the truck in the evenings instead. Something to do with my hands, something where I could see the problem and fix it. One afternoon, she sat down and started the conversation again. Nothing had happened to trigger it. No argument, no incident. She just wanted to talk about it. Said she'd been doing a lot of thinking about us. Said she still felt like there was something I was holding back. Said she'd read something recently about how men who grow up in emotionally unexpressive homes often cause real damage in their relationships without being aware of it. Said she thought that was probably what was happening between us. Said she cared about me, and that's why she kept bringing it up. I let her finish. She kept going for a bit longer. Something about the emotional labor of being with someone who won't fully open up, about men who don't do the work, about needing a partner who could be truly present instead of just physically there. I waited until the pause. Then I said, "Can I say something?" She said, "Of course. That's literally all I've ever asked for." I said, "Okay." and I started talking. Not loud, not with any heat in it, just level. Told her I had been communicating. Told her I'd been going to therapy for months and answering every question honestly and saying things out loud I'd never said to anyone before in my life. Told her I remembered the exact session where I talked about needing time after work to decompress. Told her how that got turned into, Cal admits he avoids closeness. Told her I remembered saying I sometimes felt like I wasn't fully meeting her expectations. Told her how she later used that as proof that I agreed with her version of me. Told her I'd read everything she sent me, watched the videos, listened to the podcasts, and noticed that in 2 years she had never once sent me anything about her own patterns, only ever mine. Told her about the dinner, what she said, exactly how she said it, how it felt to be sitting right there while she gave her friends a progress report on me. Told her I had kept quiet about all of it, because I thought that was what you did when you were trying to make something work. You absorb it, and you keep going. Told her the thing that actually got me to this point wasn't any single argument or any single incident. It was noticing over time that every single time I did the thing she asked me to do, every time I opened up and said something real, it didn't make us closer. It just gave her more material. Told her I was done. She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, then started saying something, I don't know exactly what, something about how this was me shutting down, how this was exactly the pattern she had been describing. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. She said I couldn't just walk out in the middle of a serious conversation. I said I wasn't walking out in the middle of a conversation. I said I just finished one. I said I communicated. Said she'd spent 2 years telling me that's what real men do. Then I left. Sat in the truck for a minute before starting it. Not because I was second-guessing anything, just because it had happened faster than I expected, and my head needed a second to catch up to what my body had already done. I had driven to work thousands of times from that apartment, knew the route without thinking, sat there and looked at the building for a second, then started the truck and drove. Didn't feel triumphant or anything like that. Just quiet. Like after a long job when the last tile is set and you stand up and look at it. You're not excited, you're just done. And it looks right. She opened the door, took one look at me, didn't ask anything. Went back to the kitchen and made food. I sat at her table and ate, and didn't say much. She put a plate in front of me and sat across with her own. We just ate. She asked once if I was all right. I said yeah. She nodded and went back to her food. That's my mom. Whole families like that. We're not cold, we just don't narrate everything. You show up, you make the food, you sit down. You don't announce that you care, you just do the thing. I used to think that was just our family. Now I think it might just be how a lot of people actually function. And the idea that it's a deficiency is something that got sold very effectively. She didn't push. Slept on her couch, went to work in the morning. My coworker could tell something was different when I showed up. Didn't ask anything. Just handed me a coffee and we got to it. I was grateful for that. Spent a few days at my mom's before going back to the apartment. Went when I knew Cassie was at work. Took my stuff. There wasn't that much, honestly. Tools I kept there, clothes, a box of random things that accumulate. Maybe an hour total. Left my key on the counter. Didn't leave a note. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. Found out through mutual people later that Cassie had called her friends that same night. Told them I'd ended things out of nowhere. From what I heard, one of her friends kept asking her to go through what I actually said, specifically. And apparently Cassie had a hard time explaining it in a way that made me sound wrong, because every time she repeated what I said, it just sounded like a guy explaining himself clearly. I wasn't there for any of that, just got it secondhand. Didn't really change anything for me either way. Got a sublet from a guy at work for a few months while I sorted out my next move. Small place, nothing fancy, but quiet. Came home, ate whatever I felt like, watched what I wanted, slept without that low-level background noise that I hadn't even fully noticed until it stopped. That part took a little while to register. Not some dramatic relief, just a gradual realization that the quiet was actually quiet now. Not just the gap between one conversation and the next one. Started going back to the gym after a few weeks. First session back, I couldn't do nearly what I used to, which was annoying. But it was something to do after work that wasn't just sitting there. Started eating better, too. Not in any planned way. Just started buying actual food instead of whatever was easiest. Cooked a few things I hadn't made in a while. Small stuff, but it added up. Ran into one of Cassie's friends at a store at some point. She was pleasant. We said hi, made small talk for about 30 seconds. No weirdness, no scene. She looked like she was going to say something more, and then didn't. We both moved on. Fine by me. Thought about the whole thing differently as more time passed. Not bitterly, just clearly. Cassie wasn't a bad person. She genuinely believed the things she said. That was the thing I kept coming back to. She wasn't running some calculated scheme. She really did think I had a problem, and she really did want to fix it. The issue was that the fixing was the relationship. There was no version of me that was going to be fixed enough to arrive at the end of the process, because the process was the point. I don't know if she ever figured that out. Probably not my business either way. Coworker asked me a few weeks later how I was doing. Said I was all right. And it was true that time. That's basically the whole story. No screaming, no public blow-up, no villain. Just 2 years of being told the problem was that I didn't communicate. And then one afternoon I sat down and communicated. Said everything clearly, without raising my voice, went through it all point by point. Used exactly the kind of direct, calm, specific communication she had spent 2 years telling me a real man would use. And that was the end of it. She wanted me to open up. I opened up. Turned out she wanted me to open up and confirm the story she already had. Not open up and present a different story with actual evidence. The irony is that the thing that finally ended, it was me doing the exact thing she always said I was incapable of doing. I communicated, just not in the direction she was expecting. The other irony is that going through all of that actually did make me better at communicating, not in the way she intended. But I learned how to put things into words in a way I couldn't before. I just learned to do it for myself, instead of handing it over to be used as evidence. If I'm ever in another relationship, I'll probably be more upfront earlier on. Not about feelings in the abstract, but about what I actually need and what I won't tolerate. That part I got from the process, even if the process itself was broken. Whether that counts as growth, I have no idea. But it's something. One thing I know for sure is that I'm not going back into a situation like that. Not because I'm bitter about it, just because I know what it costs now. And the price is too high for what you get. You give 2 years of trying, and at the end of it, the only thing that's changed is you're better at knowing when you're being managed. That's not nothing, but it's not what I was hoping to get out of the deal. I think about what I actually wanted from that relationship when it started, and it was pretty simple, honestly. Someone to come home to. Someone who was glad when I walked in the door. Someone who didn't need me to be a different version of myself to justify being with me. I don't think that's a lot to want. I think most people want exactly that, and would be embarrassed to admit how simple it actually is. Didn't get it. Tried hard for 2 years to get it. Eventually realized the version of it she was offering had a cost I wasn't going to keep paying. So I stopped. Still think it's a reasonable thing to want. Still think I'll find it at some point. Just not in that particular place with that particular person. Whatever, could be worse. MFW. I finally passed the class and got expelled for it. Anyway, tile job's going well. Got a big kitchen coming up next week. Herringbone pattern, which I don't love because it's fiddly and takes twice as long to set right. But the money's good, and the floor's going to look good when it's done. That part I can always count on. Life's all right.